Welcome to I-24 News. I'm David Matlin, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. This is Middle East Now. Thanks for joining us. Now, local mayors and regional officials from Israel's mostly evacuated and under fire northern communities, well, they met today with the government's education minister and the head of the IDF's Home Front Command. And they came seeking answers to how they'll return to any semblance of normal life anytime soon. But the cross-border fire with Hezbollah continues today after a dramatic spike in activity yesterday. A lot to discuss. But first, we take you to the border region now in the north, where correspondent Robert Swift is standing by. Rob, good to have you with us from up there now. Look, yesterday was dramatic, no doubt, in this, even in the reference and context of everything that's gone on in these last 10, 11 months. I think even now, this hour, there's new alerts, new sirens going up over there about attacks. What's happened today?
There's actually sirens going off as we speak. Just in the western end of Israel's northern border, in the area around Hanita, Shlomi, sirens going off. Now, I can see here that they are drone sirens as well as rocket sirens. Usually that indicates that the IDF has spotted a drone on its radars and launched interceptor missiles, with the rocket alert going out essentially to warn residents to get indoors due to shrapnel. So there's at least, it looks like half a dozen different communities there in the western end of Israel's northern border that are currently experiencing those sirens. Just about 20 minutes ago, there was communities just to the south of where I am, again around about 8 communities there. This is sort of halfway between the Sea of Galilee and Kiryat Shmona, a little to the south of where we're standing now. Drone sirens going off there again. Now, just to put this into a slightly broader perspective, this is the third and the fourth major security incidents on the border here today. And when I was speaking to residents in Kiryat Shmona, they were telling me that they essentially expected a day as usual following the spike, the escalation yesterday. They were suggesting that although there was this the escalation, what has become normal here in the northern border with security incidents like this, rocket attacks, anti-tank missile attacks, and infiltrations by drones, as we're now seeing, these have become the new normal. And irrespective of Hezbollah's attempt to attack yesterday and the IDF's strikes to put down that attack, irrespective of that, incidents like what we're seeing right this moment are likely to continue, according to the residents I spoke to, and so far it seems to be that their suggestions were right.
Rob Swift joining us from the northern border there, Israel, Lebanon, a lot taking place hour to hour, minute to minute here. Thanks for keeping us up to date now, and we'll come back to you for any other developments up there. It's still a tense situation. But by calling on the Lebanese people to, well, breathe and relax, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, seemed to indicate that the latest flare-up with Israel is over. But in the absence of any Gaza ceasefire deal and the cross-border fire continuing this hour, perhaps giving Hamas, though, the pressure it needs against Israel to buy more and insist on its conditions in these talks. And our Middle East correspondent, Arya Oseret, explains how Israel doesn't have the luxury of time, especially concerning those remaining 109 Israeli hostages in Gaza.
After more than 24 hours of quiet, Israel's northern border is back to wartime normal. A Hamas commander was seriously injured in an alleged Israeli drone strike near the coastal city of Sidon in southern Lebanon on Monday. This comes as 2 drones launched from Syria and Lebanon were intercepted over northern Israel. And in a message to the Lebanese public following Hezbollah's largely thwarted attack against Israel, its leader indicated the worst is behind them, at least for now.
If we decide that this initial response was not sufficient and that we need to complete it, we will do so at a later time. At the current stage, the country can take a breath and relax.
In his speech, Nasrallah explained the delay in responding to last month's assassination of Hezbollah's chief of staff, Fuad Shukr. It was due to the massive American military presence in the region and wanting to allow time to try to reach a ceasefire deal for the Gaza Strip. This linkage is also seen by Israel and its allies.
We are at a strategic crossroads, and we need to take advantage of the negotiations on Gaza to release the hostages, and through their release, to also open up the alternative of reaching a diplomatic settlement in the north, which in turn will bring calm to the region.
Hezbollah said it avoided targeting civilian population centers and limited its retaliation to the normal so-called response equation, in which the sides continue to exchange blows but avoid an all-out war. However, the main benefactor of this strategy is actually Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar. In applying military pressure on Israel, something that Hamas can't really do, Hezbollah is providing Sinwar with more time to draw out ceasefire talks until Israel accepts his demands. But it's also helping him in another way. Nasrallah's commitment to end hostilities with Israel, if a ceasefire is reached in Gaza, is in essence a guarantee that Israel will not resume the fighting if the deal collapses after the first phase.
What I believe now is that it is incumbent on all parties in the region to work towards de-escalation and stability. And so we are feverishly working in Cairo as we speak with our team and the teams of the other mediators, as well as with the Israelis, to get to a ceasefire and hostage deal along the framework that President Biden laid out, to get calm between Israel and along that border between Israel and Lebanon, and ultimately to get to a broader circumstance of regional stability.
While Hezbollah and Hamas are playing for time, Israel does not have that luxury, and the cost of this strategy will continue to be paid by tens of thousands of displaced Israelis and 109 hostages, still held in Gaza.
To get more in depth, we're joined in the studio by Ambassador Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. And we're joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseren, also here in the studio. Thank you both, gentlemen. The Ambassador, first, to bring up the United States, get your expertise on this. And let's talk at big picture first, at large. What do you see in terms of a U.S. regional strategy right now towards everything that's taking place?
Well, the U.S. objective has been and is going, as we speak, is to keep calm. They do not want to see an escalation. They do not want to see a regional war for various reasons. First of all, they do not want to involve their own personnel, and they do not want the boots on the ground. They do not want to have instability in the economic markets with raising of oil prices. Now, it is true that the United States is quite sufficient, independently sufficient of, they have enough energy sources. However, the prices is being dictated in the Gulf. So if the prices go up, whether the U.S. imports or not, it still can cause inflation. Now, if you add to this the political argumentation, then 2 months before elections, the last thing the campaign, the administration needs is escalation, and quite the opposite. They would like to score, actually, a big political bonanza by having a ceasefire. So the Archimedes, I would say, point for of the American strategy is get a deal with the hostages, ceasefire in Gaza, which would lead to a ceasefire in Lebanon, ceasefire with the Houthis, and the Iranians keep at bay, and this will give them time for more negotiations on some new arrangement in the northern border, what will be the new arrangement, the new regime in Gaza, and so on. So this is pretty much what they were doing. This is why they are pressing very, very heavily on all sides, including Israel, to maintain the quiet as much as possible, and certainly not to escalate to a regional war.
Well, certainly a unique moment, we could argue, for U.S. politics and leadership in the waning months of President Biden's term right now. And obviously the term lame duck applied to a president usually in this situation. But others are arguing right now that Biden may be freed up in some way from the political campaigns to focus more on policy, on implementing a strategy, on achieving results as you outline right now. What's your read on the potential for President Biden's administration in the next few months, the last part of his reign?
Well, the president may be a lame duck by definition almost. However, he is very much committed to the Harris campaign. And also, it seems like Kamala Harris, and she actually announcing it time and again, that she is the last one in the room. She is taking the decisions together today with the president. She's on all the calls when he makes calls with regional leaders here or with other international leaders. So anything that he may do or may refrain from doing may really reflect on the Democratic campaign. And Biden, is committed, and he would like to see his successor as the vice president.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ariel, just to question you before we go to our next guest here, and we'll have you guys to discuss a lot of the issues as we go. But on Hassan Nasrallah's speech, what stood out to you either in the actual speech itself or between the lines right now?
Well, the first thing that struck me was his lack of vigor, I think we could say, because he's usually very pompous in his speeches, but he was more toned down yesterday, and I think that's telling to the, in essence, failure of Hezbollah's response to frame it as a significant retaliation, because what they did manage to reach a threshold, they've gone past that in the past. And back in a few months back, when Israel eliminated Abu Nameh, the head of its regional command to the east, its frontier unit, they launched more than what they managed to launch yesterday. And that was mainly due to Israel's successful, not necessarily thwarting, but limiting of Hezbollah's response, keeping it at a lower threshold due to the significant firepower that it applied as the strike began. But if we're talking about the fears of this escalating to a broader war, that's what Hamas would like to see. That's what Yahya Sinwar would like to see, but that didn't happen. It didn't happen. Mainly, what didn't happen, we did not see all the proxies act in unison, but we did not see mainly Iran work together with Hezbollah. Obviously, they're in cooperation and coordination, but they didn't attack in coordination, and that's something that Hamas, I think, is frustrated for the second time since October 7th, that they didn't see the other proxies act at the same time. And you can see that by the statement given out yesterday by Hamas's military spokesperson, Abu Ubaidah, saying that all the fronts remain active, remain on fire. That's what they want to see. They want to see all the fronts active against Israel and in unison. That did not happen yesterday. And so that is another slight victory for Israel. However, I think it's impossible to frame a day with hundreds of rockets and dozens of drones launched at your country as a victory, regardless, even if it is a tactical victory, strategic, it's far from it.
We'll come back with more studio analysis with both of you as we move on. We have an authentic guest to bring to you here right now for real perspective on the situation as it's playing out up north. We're joined by Efrat Eldan Schechter. She's a resident of Sde Nehemia. Now, for our viewers, it's a small town just some 6 kilometers from the Lebanese border, very close to the town of Kiryat Shmona, making all the headlines for the wrong reasons these days in the Upper Galilee. Now displaced in central Israel. I want to add that. So thanks for being with us here. Look, first, really, I think important for our viewers to understand and describe life in Sde Nehemia. All these months that you've been living there until very recently, right? I mean, I just want to tell our viewers again, this is right on the seam line, sort of where the evacuations have been ordered and where they've stopped. You've been essentially living under Hezbollah fire all this last year. Please tell us.
Yes, that's correct. We have been living in a war zone since October 8th. We are not formally evacuated by the government because, as you said, the government evacuated those places which are 10 to 5 kilometers away from the borders, and we're 6 kilometers. However, as everyone heard, we kept being under fire the whole time, and the situation got worse in the last few weeks, I would say. I think I can put a point when the Majd al-Shams massacre with the 12 poor kids that were murdered. Yeah. And this is.
We're hoping to get her back here. A little technical issue, a lot to discuss there. Again, our resident north, Efrat, I think we have you back here now. As you mentioned, yes, everything sort of changed. The reality changed for you and your school-age children. I think I want to mention, make sure our viewers understand. You have a family up there. Everything felt different after that attack, that rocket that killed all those children. Not far from you.
Yes. So again, we have been living in a war zone in the last 10 and a half months, but I think, again, the situation got worse and we all felt that, it can come, it came near us, and it's just a Russian roulette for everyone that is still living in these places which are not evacuated, because the fire got closer and closer every time, and from having sirens, like let's say 2 or 3 times a week, it began to be more frequent, and we kept getting messages to stay near safe rooms, and our routine lives just got really, nothing is normal, nothing is routine, and we're coming closer now to September 1st, and we understand that the year school will not be opened regularly for our kids. And I think for us, this is the worst news, because again, we stayed in the kibbutz, we stayed with the community, and this is what held us, our friends and the community, and trying to maintain kind of routine. Again, it's not a routine, it's a war zone, it's a war routine, I would call it.
But a way to continue living. You were able to adapt, in some ways. Yeah.
That's for us the worst news. As parents, as a mother, I was very, very disappointed, and I just, took a decision, because I felt that no one cares for the North, and no one is taking the right decisions for us, for the residents. So I made my own decision. I have to say it's very painful for me, but I moved temporarily to the center of Israel and evacuated myself, because again, I'm not formally evacuated by the government. I don't get any support. But I felt that I have to have for my kids some kind of routine and quiet, and to start September 1st in schools and have a normal routine like every child deserves in Israel and elsewhere. So this is what we decided. And I have to say, again, it's very hard for me to take my kids away from their friends, from their natural surroundings.
The hardest, no doubt. Efrat, if you're still with us here, today the government basically extended the previous announcements, or at least delivered a new sort of announcement, meeting with community heads, that the end of the year is seen as a target date to return people to these areas. What's your reaction? Just to go straight to it, your reaction to these latest government announcements about the timetable. What are you getting from them?
I'm not surprised at all, because as I said, for us, the indication is the years, the schools, okay? If we cannot open the year regularly in our home for the school year, then it doesn't matter if it will be in 2 months or at the end of the school year. I was not surprised at all. I was prepared for that. And it's very disappointing, I think, for people of the North, for those evacuees. My mother, she is a resident of Kiryat Shmona. She's evacuated to Ra'anana. This is why I came also to stay here in the center of Israel, to stay with her. People are out of their homes for more than 10 months and counting. I mean, no one knows when they will be able to come back to their homes, when we will be able to come back to my home and to our home and live safely and maintain a routine. This is the basic thing that we are asking. Security, I think it's something basic, for every human being. And we feel that the government cannot provide this and cannot tell us the deadline, when it's going to happen and why it's not happening. I have to tell you, on Sunday, we were, in the Sunday morning, we were surprised to wake up very early for the news that Israel initiated preemptive attack on Hezbollah. Right. And although, of course, everyone was fearful of having this attack and the consequences for the North, the immediate consequence of the missiles and drones and attacks, we were happy to believe that the government takes action, finally. Yeah. But then again, after a few hours, we understood that nothing happened really for the North, and the situation is not changed, and we're still
no end in sight
our daily.
Efrat, stay safe, you and your family and your children, especially now relocated to central Israel. We as well hope for a speedy return to your home communities. Thank you for being with us on the show.
Thank you.
Now, despite the optimism conveyed by the Biden administration from this latest round of hostage ceasefire deal talks, by all accounts, these negotiations have hit a dead end. Hamas outright rejecting any of the recent proposals. And meanwhile, the families of Israeli hostages are growing increasingly impatient at home with their own prime minister. There's more in this report from Jody Natelovitz.
Sunday's visits to Cairo by Israeli and Hamas officials has once again produced no concrete results regarding a deal to free the Israeli hostages in Gaza. According to Egyptian sources, mediators proposed various alternatives to the current situation of Israeli forces stationed along the Philadelphia and Netzarim corridors, land that Israel argues is vital to keep as a militarized buffer zone to prevent Hamas from rearming. But none of the proposed ideas were accepted by either side. Hamas official Osama Hamdan told the group's Al-Aqsa TV on Sunday,
"We will not accept discussions about retractions from what we agreed to on July 2nd or new conditions."
Israel also had reservations about many of the Palestinian prisoners Hamas is demanding to see released as part of a deal. U.S. officials have been optimistic, saying talks in Cairo were, quote, constructive and were conducted in the spirit of reaching a final and implementable agreement with all sides sharing that sentiment.
It is incumbent on all parties in the region to work towards de-escalation and stability. And so we are feverishly working in Cairo as we speak with our team and the teams of the other mediators, as well as with the Israelis, to get to a ceasefire and hostage deal along the framework that President Biden laid out.
Israelis are growing more frustrated with the state of talks, taking to the streets in protest against the government. And for those that can't attend in person, one Israeli was inspired by the use of puppets in peaceful protests around the world.
To the people who want to listen, to fix all the things that are wrong with me.
It's about giving voice to people, to talk through the leaders. This project allows people to connect from anywhere around the world with their mobile phones and to speak through Netanyahu. Well, we're still waiting on a hostage deal and a ceasefire, and we all want to end this war. And I think there is one person that is responsible for stopping it and has most of the power, and we hope that maybe we can convince him to look at himself and hear what the people have to say.
As we near the 11th month mark of the war, 109 Israelis are still held hostage by Hamas, and the process of addressing remaining issues and closing gaps will continue in the coming days. But in the meantime, the optimism generated by the U.S. proved premature.
On the important subject of the hostages still in Gaza, we're joined now by Daniel Lifshitz, whose grandparents were violently kidnapped from Kibbutz Nir Oz by Gazan marauders back on October 7th. Now, notably, his grandmother, Yocheved, she was released early in the war. That was late October, while his grandfather, Oded Lifshitz, is still being held in, from what I know, unknowable conditions inside Gaza. Look, thanks for being with us here. First of all, how is your grandmother, Yocheved, since her release from captivity, and is anything known about the condition of your grandfather?
Thank you for welcoming me, first of all. And it's been more than 10 months now. For my grandmother, she recovered. She physically, mentally, every day she's thinking about the hostages that are still there. My grandfather, which is now 84 years old, he has lung disease, and it's really devastating considering the situation that only this week we bury 4 members of Kibbutz Nir Oz. I'm Perry. Tomorrow, yesterday, Alex Danzig, and last week it has been Abraham Munder and Yoram Metzger. Today I came from the Shiva of Munder. Yesterday the funeral of Alex Danzig, those that could come back from Gaza in the last deal. And unfortunately they are not with us, which not give us a lot of hope, considering my grandfather, which is one of the last old men that are still there. My grandmother, she really feels so frustrated from the situation, like all of us, and we are trying to keep our energy and fight. And every time we hear there is possibility of a deal, no deal, yes deal, it's such a difficult for everyone here, and it's heartbreaking every time when there is a possibility and when it's a withdrawal. For the situation now, when everyone speaks now about the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor, and every time Netanyahu is saying it's Hamas who reject the deal, the Americans say it's Hamas who reject the deal. Let's come and tell them, you know what? We go out of Philadelphia only for the tactical point of view. Let's see if they sign a deal. And I mean, if Hamas is signing a deal, we can always count that they will break it. Like they break the last deal and Israel came back, we came back to fight. So it will happen, the same will happen. So what I'm suggesting is go to the negotiation table back saying, okay, no problem, we go out from the Philadelphia. Let's see if Hamas will sign the deal. And if Hamas will say no, we will understand that the only problem to not having now a deal that will release all the hostages and start a ceasefire in Gaza is only because Hamas don't want it.
Look, I know your grandfather, 84 years old, would likely be, and maybe for sure, be in this first batch of prisoners that would be released under the deal, at least the framework that's been put forward to us in the public. You know, what's your family's attitude, if you can generalize, towards these U.S. brokered talks aimed at securing further releases of hostages?
I must say that we are not very positive about the possibility of the deal. I wasn't so positive from start, and I'm not that positive now. I don't think that the sides have been agreed to the problematic sections, and going onward and backward on the same things is useless, in my opinion. And they just have to go and sign the deal which will both sides can accept. And I mean, and if this deal is not acceptable by both sides, just issue a new one. Of course, we are waiting, and we know that my grandfather can be among the humanitarian phase of the deal. But first of all, most important for my grandfather, I can tell you that for my grandfather that he's there, most important, first of all, is those women to come back. Arbel Yahoud, she's the sister of my best friend, Olev Yahoud, who be murdered in October 7. And we must bring them back. When they are going there, the team, when they are going to negotiate, they have to think about those women who they are the first on the deal that's been agreed between the sides. I think it's about 12 women for sure. And I mean, they just need to think about them when they are going there to negotiate, because if they will think about what's going on to Arbel Yahoud and Carmel Gat and Doron Steinbacher and all the women soldiers, I'm sure they can do more. And Bibi and Sarah need to think about them as well when they are standing here and giving the mandate to close the deal.
Daniel Lifshitz, as painful as it is to appear here, thank you for your time, for us, for our viewers, to take in the situation your family's going through. Stay strong.
Thank you so much.
And we step out for a short break here in the program. We'll be right back, though, with much more on Middle East Now.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to Middle East Now and I-24 News. We continue live here from Tel Aviv as the United States is working hard with Saudi Arabia to enhance strategic coordination, a pathway to Saudi-Israel normalization, and an eventual Palestinian state. Now, these revelations were made by the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Michael Ratney, in an interview that he did this week with leading Saudi news. Now, while no specific time frame was mentioned, the ambassador claimed the two countries, that's the U.S. and the Saudis, came, quote, very close on very important elements of this agreement, close quote. He did reveal that the talks aim to deepen military ties between the U.S. and the Saudis. Notable, White House National Security Advisor Sullivan had a series of meetings in May with Crown Prince bin Salman that was described in Saudi press at the time as an almost, quote unquote, finalized draft of a deal between Washington and Riyadh. There's a lot at play and at stake when it comes to these types of discussions. Again, I want to come back into the studio here with Ambassador Ayalon. Just one point on this, Ambassador. The U.S., how do you describe their position of influence, leverage, their position at large to work on big things, such as the Saudi-Israel deal?
Oh, absolutely. That would be a great achievement for the U.S. If we talk about the time sensitivity, that would be great for the Harris campaign, but I'm not sure that this is in the cards. This is why the United States, understanding that they cannot now, let's say, square the circle, they are going incrementally and they're going in a vertical way. That means, first of all, they are getting an agreement with the Saudis and waiting for Israel to come in, because there is one caveat here that they need, the Saudis would like to have an agreement which is a real legal agreement, and for that they need the endorsement of Congress to actually bring it into a law, legislation. If it's just without the Congress, only with an executive order of the president, any president in the future can just change it, just like the JCPOA with Iran was actually nixed by President Trump after it was signed by Obama, but without the Congress legislation. So the U.S. is still in kind of a limbo, and they have some leverage over Israel for sure, over the Saudis maybe, but when it comes, let's say, for the hostages deal, which is, again, it's the anchor to bring about ceasefire and then maybe talks, direct talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia about the new architecture in the region. For that, they need Hamas acquiescence, and they do not have any leverage whatsoever, David, over Hamas. I mean, if we do not come to an agreement, well, Israel can continue to pulverize Hamas, we can beat them into a pulp, but this may take time. This is time that the hostages do not have, and this is what Sinwar is playing on.
Now, there's other diplomacy going on around the region. Look, as the U.S., at least the Biden administration, Ariel, seems to be coming around to the path that the Trump administration was on, really working on this rapprochement between the Saudis and the Israelis, things that they'd seemed to push away in the early years of this administration. They're now coming back around to this with all the power to bear, it appears. But there's other diplomacy in the region now, the Qataris and the Iranians. What's Iran essentially doing in reaction, if we could even say, to what the U.S. is trying to do? Where's the diplomacy on that side of the issue?
Well, first, Iran, as far as the region is concerned, has its response still coming to Israel. Its military chief of staff reiterated today that the response will come. And the new foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, he explained that in a phone call with his Italian counterpart, that while Iran does not want regional escalation, it is not afraid of it, trying to increase, I think, the Iranian posture. But yeah, first of all, we are seeing an interesting visit today by the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, basically the man who's heading the negotiations on behalf of Qatar. He's visiting Tehran today. He met with his counterpart Araghchi, we just mentioned, as well as expected to meet with President Pezeshkian. That is an interesting visit. Obviously, they will talk about the negotiations, but also Qatar playing this double-sided game. Obviously, anytime it's in talks with Iran is interesting. But Iran is trying to see pretty much, because it's in for the long game, it wants to see how long the American military posture will remain, how long their military assets will stay here, because it's believed that America's military mobilization in recent weeks, and especially the order by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to speed up the arrival of the second carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, that arrived just a few days ago in the region. It's believed that that is what prevented not only Iran from cooperating, but has extended or delayed the Hezbollah response that we saw the other day, and also perhaps the Iranian and Houthi response in Yemen that they vowed to carry out, and there's no reason for us to believe that won't happen. So with Iran kind of looking at this in the for the long haul, they're not in any rush. They just want to see how this current situation presents itself. Obviously, if there is a deal, a ceasefire deal reached in Gaza, all sides have created linkage between that and all the other fronts against Israel. But in the absence of that, their proxy activity against Israel is going to continue. And so they're trying to space it out, not put all their chickens in one basket, so to speak. And by doing that, they're also keeping more aces up their sleeves, but at the end of the day, trying to not escalate the situation in a way that fingers can be pointed at them.
Ambassador, looking at the Saudis in particular right now, and many are arguing this, what's your estimation? Are they quietly rooting for a resounding Israeli victory against the Muslim Brotherhood offshoot in Gaza, Hamas, against the movement, the general movement of jihadist political entities across the Middle East, which are not friendly with the Saudi regime? Is there an interest there?
Absolutely, and they're really rooting for an Israeli, let's say, victory over Iran. Their major, or their nemesis is the Iranian. The Shiites of Iran who are really targeting the Sunnah of Saudi Arabia. Also, there is some Shiite population in the southern part of Saudi Arabia that the Iranians have been trying to actually mobilize against the regime in Riyadh, and this could be very, very dangerous. So this is something that they would like to see. There's two, actually, I would say, camps today. There is the radical camp. Iran, of course, is the head of it with all its proxies, and in back of that is China and Russia, and then you have the U.S.-led alliance, which means Israel and all the Sunni, moderate Sunni countries. First and foremost is Saudi Arabia. We have to remember, David, that only 5 years ago, the Saudi oil installations of Aramco was hit by Iranian, none other than Iranians, and they took away about 50% of its production for quite a while. So this is their main enemy. They cannot say it out loud, but under the radar, they would like to have an alliance with Israel on these two fronts. First of all, as a security alliance, deterrence against Iran, and also for the long run, they also need Israeli technology, because food security and water availability is also something which is in their mind very much.
Definitely a two-way beneficial road, potentially. Yeah, Ariel.
No, I have to chime in because for the second night in a row, it appears that Israel's defense minister's office, they're watching this show because they just issued a statement that really connects with everything that was just said. So statement in the name of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant following a meeting with the American head of the Chief of Joint Staffs, Charles Brown, visiting the region. Also a meeting with Herzi Halevi, Israel's Chief of Staff. In the statement saying that, quote, Iran's aggression is breaking all records. In the face of this aggression, we must advance joint capabilities that cross borders in all the fronts, all the arenas of the war. So exactly onto that, the recognition that you need a regional coordination, regional, some might say even pact, security pact, to counter Iran's proxy activity in the region. This is something that Israel is talking about, the Americans are talking about. It would be nice to see other partners in the region talking about this in public.
Middle East correspondent Ariel Saran, thanks for being with us. We'll let you go. Ambassador, we're going to hold on to you for a bit longer here, but we do move on to another topic of discussion here. The Gulf Cooperation Council Secretary General. Now, he claimed Israel's ongoing, as he put it, violations in Gaza are the primary drivers of escalating crises in the Middle East. And he called for urgent international action to address the issue. Now, speaking at a United Nations-initiated forum, he pressed the need for an international conference involving all relevant parties, but essentially angled his remarks to stress that the apparent solution to all the region's troubles is to pressure Israel and hold the country, quote, accountable for its actions, close quote. Now we jump to our Dubai correspondent, I-24 News out there, Bastien Bory in Dubai again. Look, what's behind this statement, or the general meaning? What's being read from this statement, unofficially, officially, from the GCC?
The GCC statements are like those of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They're fairly easy to read because they actually describe the position of Saudi Arabia, which is the most powerful country of these two organizations. And we know that Mohammed bin Salman has to deal with millions of people among his population who are very sensitive to the Palestinian cause. Saudi Arabia is not the UAE. It's a country of 35 million people with an increasingly low median age and undergoing major social transformations. It is a country that's suddenly entering a new era. So today, in addition to the most Islamist fringe of the Saudi population, people who are often older, today millions of young and very young people, even if they appreciate and benefit from the social reforms that the government is very slowly putting in place, these young folks are nonetheless witnessing their very first Israeli-Palestinian conflict with the current war in Gaza. It's a conflict that's already one of great military violence on both sides, with all the added violence of social networks, which wasn't the case for young people 20 years ago. So Mohammed bin Salman, if he wants his deal of the century, recognizing Israel's existence and in exchange for nuclear capabilities, MBS is going to have to be very careful about what Saudis of all ages think. And this GCC statements today is nothing more than a way of going along with what Saudi public opinion thinks.
Do we know, do we have a good view on just domestically, for the Saudis, how sensitive the Palestinian issue is, and by default then for the Saudi Crown Prince bin Salman? Is this a tough issue for him to navigate domestically?
Yes, David, it is very sensitive, and this statement today from GCC is actually also there to put pressure on both the Americans and the Israelis so that a Palestinian state can finally see the light of day. Because if there isn't a Palestinian state, there are a lot of Saudis who will be unhappy, and probably rightly so, and that would be bad news for the stability of power in Saudi Arabia. And political stability is precisely what Riyadh needs to develop its economy.
Now, do you think it's critical, from what you're reading around the region, from what we're hearing, critical to resolve, if I use this word, the issues in Gaza, the war in Gaza, before any open ties can be established between Israel and the Saudis?
In the end, it's not that much of a threat because MBS is making a very cynical calculation. Today, according to him, what's profitable for him and what will enable him to satisfy his ambitions, particularly his economic ambitions, is the signing of the Abraham Accords with Israel, with all the repercussions that this will have for the Saudis, namely getting nuclear capabilities, Israeli technology transfers, defense pacts with the Americans, etc., etc. So defending the Palestinian cause tooth and nail is not as profitable as it used to be for the Saudis. However, on the other hand, yes, MBS is still trying and basically has to impose the creation of a Palestinian state to ensure that there is no upheaval among the Saudi population after the signing of the Abraham Accords.
Bastien Bory in Dubai, thanks for being with us. And come back to the studio with Ambassador Ayalon here. Look, on all the diplomatic moves and discussions we've talked about here with the Saudis, the United States pushing for alliances against Iran, deterrence, bringing in carrier groups, nuclear submarines. How do you see the Iranian sort of option playbook at this point there? Are they sitting back more looking at, what options do they have in terms of, they're not without options at this point, are they?
Yes, but I think their options are quite limited because they're very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable with their economy, which is, in any case, in a shambles. And they're very vulnerable for attacks by whatever, whoever, US, Israel, or others, that can really take out whether they're nuclear installations, their ports, and most importantly, their oil infrastructure. And with that, they can really bring down the Iranian economy, actually grinding it to a halt. And that could mean a real rioting in the streets. Because
is regime change a realistic target for Israelis right now?
I think now, as we see what the Iranian are capable of, and actually the ring of fire they arranged against Israel, and basically not just against Israel, against the entire Middle East. And this is when they do not have yet nuclear capabilities. So I think it is now quite necessary to change the objectives. I know it was not, the US was very careful about it, not to say regime change, right. But I think now it could be, and it should be, the goal, regime change, because I think also this will have an internal impact in Iran, where the people of Iran, which do not like this Ayatollah's regime, maybe 20% are for this regime, all those nomenclature, the ones that live off it. But I believe if they will understand that this is the goal, then we may see fragmentation, and we may see the Iranian people who are quite smart and quite capable, maybe they will help with this historic change.
I'm glad you bring up the Iranian nuclear issue here with the regime seemingly implacably committed to Israel's destruction. Very, very relevant. Ambassador Danny Ayalon, thanks for being with us on the program.
Pleasure.
We pivot a bit here. Nearly 11 months into the war with Hamas, Israel's economy, it's struggling, no surprise. Under the weight of an ongoing offensive in Gaza, the threats of a still wider conflict looming over the country. Prime Minister Netanyahu has tried to ease concerns at various times, saying the economic damage is only temporary, but the open state of war and all the pressure on Israel's domestic sector has seen foreign investment dry up to some degree here, and obviously the pressure only mounting on those inside Israel. We're joined by Dr. Alex Coleman. We're now an economy expert from Tel Aviv University. Good to have you back here, Dr. Coleman. Look, there's a staggering cost of war that I think most people don't think about on a daily basis. Even yesterday, for example, seeing 100 jets, fly into Lebanon, yes. 1,000 missiles, perhaps, targets taken out. There's an enormous cost to an operation like
Absolutely.
that. Dollars, okay, maybe to the tune of hundreds of millions for an operation just like that yesterday.
We're talking about billions, even if you're talking about the total cost.
How does the country deal with this? Is Israel
well? It's not just
from this. Yeah.
Well, it's not just these expenses. You should also take into account that you have tens of thousands of people who are mobilized. So people who are taken away from their jobs and are actually fighting in Gaza or in the north. So this is also damage to the Israeli economy. The Israeli economy is very strong. I mean, if you're looking at the growth from 2010, we were number 4 in terms of growth, 140%. So Israel is a very strong horse, but it's being bled. The major problem, I mean, the war is, of course, an external problem that is very difficult to control. The problem is the management of the economy, because particularly, I mean, it's easy for us to think about the family in trouble. You want to manage your expenses. And in our case, this is not happening. You mentioned Netanyahu. If you look at Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, they keep talking about how strong the Israeli economy is, and they keep bleeding it to death. Smotrich, in particular, is very problematic because he does not believe in the people working in the Ministry of Finance. So he basically ignores them. He does not believe in science. He believes in this saying that if you follow all the rules, you'll get rain, crops, fruit, and security. So basically, all you need to do is pray, and everything will be okay. This is very problematic because it's basically a solution of impotence, which says it does not depend on us, it depends on God. And as a result, he has no
long-term strategy. I mean, the Ayatollah, for example, he's very eloquent in describing his long-term strategy of this prolonged war on Israel, bleeding the country economically, brain drain, perhaps. There's a long-term strategy in place there to squeeze the country of Israel into defeat. And that the economy is a big part of that. You don't see any signs of that on the Israeli side, sort of a long-term strategy to come
Not
back,
at all.
to defeat it, to
Not at all.
surpass it.
Not at all. This is a ridiculous scenario. I mean, this scenario, I think, feeds on what happened with Star Wars when the U.S. and Russia were competing, and as a result, Russia basically collapsed. This is not a scenario, not a viable scenario at all. I mean, people in Israel are going to suffer. Quality of life is going to go down. Taxes are going to go up. The economy will really shrink, which is sad. But collapse is not an option at all. No. We have a very strong economy. We have very strong credit from the world. So, and also, as soon as we win this war, the economy will take off incredibly.
Dr. Alex Cohen, thanks for being with us. We'll end on that optimistic note, absolutely, for this topic, for sure. Look, focusing elsewhere in the Middle East here. Next door, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says efforts to mend ties with neighboring adversarial Turkey have so far brought no results. Now, Assad declared as much before the Syrian parliament yesterday, saying those most recent efforts brokered by Russia, Iran, and Iraq, well, they went nowhere. Now, Turkey severed ties with Syria back in 2011 at the outbreak of the war. Now, we're joined by Mehmet Ogochu. He's a former Turkish diplomat and a chairman of the Global Resources Partnership. Good to have you with us. Thank you for joining. Look, Turkey has troops deployed inside Syrian territory along its lengthy border. Is this one of the main issues for Assad? You know, what's on the table between these two countries now?
Well, I mean, as you know, so many countries are trying to bring Turkey and Syria together around the same table. Primarily, Russia is putting a lot of pressure on Ankara and Damascus. Then Iraqi president and prime minister volunteered to broker a deal. And Iranians are pushing Syria as well to make a deal, Qataris, Saudis. But it's not happening. It's interesting because both sides want to shake hands and try to find a solution to this long-standing problem between the two countries. But the issue is Syria is divided. So you have the Kurds controlling the northern part of the country. Then you have the Russians and Iranians with active military presence, naval as well as land forces. And then the problem in Lebanon and Israeli attacks. So among all these troublesome issues, then Turkey figures prominently because Turkey says it has troops on the border, on the other side of the border, to control the terrorist infiltration. They don't want to allow a Kurdish autonomous region to be created there, as Americans want. And they also have quite different divergent view with the Russians and the Iranians. So I think it was an opportune time to sit down around the same table and find out what can be achieved, because you are bound by the geography. However, Assad follows a very smart diplomacy, one has to admit it. What he said in parliament is clearly, look, I mean, there are two preconditions for sitting around the table with Ankara. One is Turkish troops should withdraw from the border region. This is not going to happen anytime soon unless Turkey feels that its borders are secure. And secondly, Turkey should stop supporting terrorist elements there, which Syria considers terrorists. Then Turkey considers PYD terrorists. So who is terrorists, who is freedom fighters is quite a different ballgame. Therefore, I think it's an urgent matter for both sides feeling the pressure to sit down and find a solution. It shouldn't be a photo opportunity, because I think Assad is afraid of that.
Yes.
If we cannot make progress on the fundamental principles, if we sit around the same table, it's going to be just a photo opportunity. So the ground has to be well prepared, Assad says.
Look,
and
does Russia, looking at the wider geopolitical
position.
situation around Turkey here, get your thoughts. Is Turkey seen as a wedge with NATO, with the United States, sort of useful to the axis forming, Russia and others in the region, Iran?
Well, Turkey has difficulties with the United States. You have the sanctions. There's this F-35 issue still around that. And then Erdogan couldn't achieve a summit meeting with Biden at White House. And with NATO also, there are serious difficulties because Turkey feels that its security interests, legitimate interests, have not been taken into account. Article 5 is nowhere to be trusted. And in such a situation, of course, Turkey feels closer to Russia and China, but I don't think that there is a similar support coming from Beijing or Moscow. Therefore, Ankara, under economic duress that it's facing right now, is getting closer to European Union and the United States, looking for opportunities to mandatize. And in that regard, I think what Israel is doing right now in Gaza and further incursions to Lebanon and attacks in Iran and Syria, and there are serious divergences of opinion. And Turkey is acting as if it's the protector of Hamas. That's not welcome, of course, in Israel or the United States. So the situation, geopolitically speaking, is a bit vague. And Ankara should also inspire some trust in among its allies, which is not there. Not only with European Union and the United States, but also with Chinese, the Russians, and Iranians, and Syrians, or the Gulf nations. So Turkey has to be emerging as a country which can be trusted. Of course, legitimate security, economic, foreign policy interests will be protected. There is no doubt about that. But one example is seen with Syria. Syrians, especially Assad, do not trust Erdogan.
Look, Mehmet,
that's the reason why
a lot of layers to the Turkey story here. Appreciate you helping us unpack some of them here on Middle East Now. Thanks for joining us today. Unfortunately, so much to discuss. Out of time for today, but I've enjoyed being with you. Thank you as well for joining us here on Middle East Now. I'm David Matlin, live in Tel Aviv.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
After Israel turns back a big Hezbollah attack, the exchange of fire across the northern border resumes its normal pace with no end in sight for the tens of thousands of displaced residents. We'll have the latest. Hamas rejects the latest U.S. proposal for a hostage release for Gaza ceasefire deal, claiming the terms were altered in Israel's favor as hostage families lose patience with Prime Minister Netanyahu's approach. We'll have the details. New concerns over anti-Semitic attacks in France after a synagogue is firebombed. We'll take a closer look at that. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. A day after Israel thwarted a major attempted rocket attack by Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Lebanese terror movement has resumed its tit-for-tat airstrikes on the country's north, a new normal that is anything but. But the challenge of providing sufficient security, enabling the return home of the more than 6,000 Israelis evacuated from the north remains unresolved. And the continuing threat posed by Hezbollah's attacks has become inextricably linked with the IDF's ongoing battle against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran takes a closer look.
After more than 24 hours of quiet, Israel's northern border is back to wartime normal. A Hamas commander was seriously injured in an alleged Israeli drone strike near the coastal city of Sidon in southern Lebanon on Monday. This comes as 2 drones launched from Syria and Lebanon were intercepted over northern Israel. And in a message to the Lebanese public following Hezbollah's largely thwarted attack against Israel, its leader indicated the worst is behind them, at least for now.
If we decide that this initial response was not sufficient and that we need to complete it, we will do so at a later time. At the current stage, the country can take a breath and relax.
In his speech, Nasrallah explained the delay in responding to last month's assassination of Hezbollah's chief of staff, Fuad Shukr. It was due to the massive American military presence in the region and wanting to allow time to try to reach a ceasefire deal for the Gaza Strip. This linkage is also seen by Israel and its allies.
We are at a strategic crossroads, and we need to take advantage of the negotiations on Gaza to release the hostages, and through their release, to also open up the alternative of reaching a diplomatic settlement in the north, which in turn will bring calm to the region.
Hezbollah said it avoided targeting civilian population centers and limited its retaliation to the normal so-called response equation, in which the sides continue to exchange blows but avoid an all-out war. However, the main benefactor of this strategy is actually Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar. In applying military pressure on Israel, something that Hamas can't really do, Hezbollah is providing Sinwar with more time to draw out ceasefire talks until Israel accepts his demands. But it's also helping him in another way. Nasrallah's commitment to end hostilities with Israel if a ceasefire is reached in Gaza is in essence a guarantee that Israel will not resume the fighting if the deal collapses after the first phase.
We have been concerned about the conflict escalating into an all-out regional war since October 7th, and we have worked round the clock with partners and allies, moving military assets, engaging in intensive diplomacy, both publicly and privately behind the scenes, to avert that outcome. We continue to work to avert that outcome. And our hope is that the events of last night do not spill out into an escalation that leads to regional war.
While Hezbollah and Hamas are playing for time, Israel does not have that luxury. And the cost of this strategy will continue to be paid by tens of thousands of displaced Israelis and 109 hostages, still held in Gaza.
And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Robert Swift, in northern Israel. And Robert, we didn't see that escalation, but if anyone thought yesterday's attempted attack and the Israel turning it back would change anything in the north, I guess today was a sobering reminder that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. When we spoke to residents inside Kiryat Shmona, I didn't know what to expect for what they would say with regards to their expectations. And basically they were saying, we expect more of the same, more of this wartime routine, as we've referred to it. And to be honest, you can see that in the events that have taken place today in the northern border. There's been 4 major security incidents. 3 of them looks like they stemmed from actions by Hezbollah emanating in Lebanon. Again, a series of drone infiltrations. The most 2 recent incidents just over an hour ago. One drone infiltration appearing to take place in the far western end of Israel's northern border, and a little bit before that, a similar event taking place in the far eastern end of the border, close to where we are, near Kiryat Shmona, just to the south of that city. And these are events that I've reported on countless times. It is very much back to routine. The escalation that took place between Hezbollah and the IDF yesterday, it doesn't really seem to have changed the picture here, at least not in the immediate term.
Right, and of course, we have to keep in mind, and we should keep in mind, for example, the school year will be starting in a couple of weeks. And again, this is the normal, but for the people, those over 60,000 people, life there is far from normal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is the basis, the background for some of the comments that were being made to me by residents I spoke with. Earlier today, there was a meeting that took place between Israel's Minister of Education, the Home Front Command, and many of the mayors responsible for towns in the northern parts of Israel. And from reports, it appears that was a pretty heated exchange. One of the mayors essentially said that irrespective of what the Education Ministry was attempting to do in terms of the dates that they would like education to begin, he wouldn't open schools in his areas of responsibility because he didn't want to see another Majlis Shams take place. Many of the mayors here are clearly very angry towards the central government. They feel that sufficient security has not been given to them and the residents. They haven't been able to return people home. Even the actions that took place yesterday, many of the mayors referred to the IDF's operation as Peace for Tel Aviv, which was a deliberately ironic attempt to draw what, in their opinion, is the IDF's efforts to protect the central parts of the country, but its failures so far over 10.5 months to secure the northern communities.
All right, and I can understand their frustration. Robert Swift there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. In studio, Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, the former commander of Special Forces, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. And Doron, you know, here in Israel, Hassan Nasrallah was mocked on social media with memes, ridiculing him for claiming the attack was a success, which of course it wasn't. But you could understand him feeling a little smug and self-satisfied when you realize Israel is kind of back to square one in the north in a routine that Hezbollah and, as Ariel pointed out in his video, also Hamas are quite comfortable with.
It's true, but still we have to also count what works for us. I mean, this preemptive strike that the IDF was conducting, this shows capacity, capabilities, intelligence, and he pays dearly. I mean, he's positioning himself as if his attack was successful. It's not successful when your enemy is not credible. It means that it's weak. So let's take it in this context. For sure, the evacuation. This is a concession we made at the beginning of the conflict, and it puts it in some sense we gave some tactical advantage to Hezbollah in the fact that the citizens are not back to their places. But given the circumstances, the decision was made in this context. We have to also see that it's a great achievement of the IDF. The great retaliation turns out to be nothing that we can take seriously, and we succeeded to preemptive it. I think it's important, and it's important to say to the Israeli public also to present the structure as it is, and not to all the time fall into a sense of not respecting enough the success of the IDF in the...
I would say I did that certainly in last night's program. Today we're looking at today we are looking at, for example, Ariel, the condition of those residents in the north, and you understand the frustration and the government trying to make some attempts to mollify them clearly today, but how far can that go?
Yeah, with postponing the date of return to the end of the year, but even that, the government hasn't yet to this moment explained to the public in the north under what conditions will it deem it safe enough to bring them back. These residents still don't know. And these are the residents who have been evacuated, where there's about double who have not been evacuated and are in the line of fire, who are asking themselves on a day like today, okay, is it only if Hezbollah decides to fire at us, only then will the government respond? This is taking place as two interesting statements come out this evening. We're talking about Sullivan, the American head of national security, talked about their concern for regional conflict, for it escalating. We did get Hezbollah's response, but we're still waiting for two more. That's Iran and the Houthis in Yemen. And we're hearing this evening from the chief of staff of Iran's armed forces, not the IRGC, the military, the official standing military of Iran, saying that the retaliation by the axis of resistance and Iran against Israel for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh is inevitable. And on the contrary to that, the flip side, today is in Israel visiting the chairman of the chairman of the chief staff, General Charles Brown. He met with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant as well as Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff of the IDF. And in that meeting, Defense Minister Gallant saying that Iran's aggression is breaking all records, and in order to counter it, and I think this is the most interesting part of the statement, we need to promote joint cross-border capabilities. That's alluding to regional cooperation, coordination, not only between Israel and the United States, in all the arenas of war.
Right, and of course that's kind of a reference maybe to this whole idea of a pact, a NATO-like pact that will include Israel among these, what some may call the Sunni or moderate countries, if you want to say, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, as a united front against Iran. Let's keep in mind a lot of that is going to be dependent on the outcome of the conflict in Gaza. And that is also very dependent now on the outcome of the talks for a hostage negotiation. Unfortunately, despite the optimism that was conveyed by the Biden administration going into this latest round of talks to reach a hostage release for Gaza ceasefire deal, the negotiations have again turned into a bit of a dead end. Hamas has rejected a U.S.-crafted proposal that it said altered the terms it agreed to last month, while Israel says it's the terror group that's holding up a deal. Meanwhile, families of the Israeli hostages are growing increasingly impatient with Prime Minister Netanyahu's approach to the talks. More on this report from Jody Notelowitz.
Sunday's visits to Cairo by Israeli and Hamas officials has once again produced no concrete results regarding a deal to free the Israeli hostages in Gaza. According to Egyptian sources, mediators proposed various alternatives to the current situation of Israeli forces stationed along the Philadelphia and Netzarim corridors, land that Israel argues is vital to keep as a militarized buffer zone to prevent Hamas from rearming. But none of the proposed ideas were accepted by either side. Hamas official Osama Hamdan told the group's Al-Aqsa TV on Sunday,
"We will not accept discussions about retractions from what we agreed to on July 2nd or new conditions."
Israel also had reservations about many of the Palestinian prisoners Hamas is demanding to see released as part of a deal. U.S. officials have been optimistic, saying talks in Cairo were, quote, constructive and were conducted in the spirit of reaching a final and implementable agreement with all sides sharing that sentiment.
It is incumbent on all parties in the region to work towards de-escalation and stability. And so we are feverishly working in Cairo as we speak with our team and the teams of the other mediators, as well as with the Israelis, to get to a ceasefire and hostage deal along the framework that President Biden laid out.
Israelis are growing more frustrated with the state of talks, taking to the streets in protest against the government. And for those that can't attend in person, one Israeli was inspired by the use of puppets in peaceful protests around the world.
To the people who want to listen, to fix all the things that are wrong with me.
It's about giving voice to people, to talk through the leaders. This project allows people to connect from anywhere around the world with their mobile phones and to speak through Netanyahu. Well, we're still waiting on a hostage deal and a ceasefire, and we all want to end this war. And I think there is one person that is responsible for stopping it and has most of the power, and we hope that maybe we can convince him to look at himself and hear what the people have to say.
As we near the 11th month mark of the war, 109 Israelis are still held hostage by Hamas, and the process of addressing remaining issues and closing gaps will continue in the coming days. But in the meantime, the optimism generated by the U.S. proved premature.
Doron, if there was just a fundamental roadblock here in Hamas really wanting Israel to end its offensive against it, pull out of Gaza, then obviously there's not going to be a deal. Some of these other issues, the Philadelphia corridor, the number and the character of the prisoners being released, possibly they could be bridged, but is there really any optimism of the latter option?
The real issue, and this is why there also talks about a big deal, a big hostage deal, comes to the point whether we were willing to end the war, whether we're willing to withdraw, the IDF is willing to withdraw to the parameters and wait there, and whether we'll have the ability to act when we feel we should act. So this is really the issues. Hamas wants an end for the war. It's hard for us in the context of the current situation to end the war while Sinwar is still ruling Gaza. And the point that we didn't plan any day after, and there's no other force that can replace Hamas, this really complicates the situation right now.
All right, yes, and Ariel, Hamas again. There is doubt that Sinwar really, under any terms, is going to agree to a deal, and there are some in Israel who feel the same way about Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And look, what Hamas is trying to do now, it's trying to create a wedge between the mediators by attacking them while presenting it as if they're attacking Prime Minister Netanyahu. Because what the negotiators are talking about now is an American proposal that the negotiators both voiced their support over, and the Egyptian foreign minister went so far as last week saying that this proposal is the only relevant proposal. So what the statement that we saw from Osama Hamdan in Jody's story, calling for a return to July 2nd, that is irrelevant according to the mediators. And what we are seeing in recent days is that the discourse that Hamas is trying to promote is changing the reality, and they are presenting it as if it's the Israelis who made the changes, as opposed to the negotiators who adopted some of Israel's proposals in the absence of an agreement between both sides. This is the agreement that the mediators feel is the correct one, and Hamas is trying to change their opinion on that.
I wonder if that's the case. Then basically, we unfortunately, at this stage, it's hard to be optimistic about how this is going to turn out, but let's just try to hope anyway. Moving on, the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is at it again, insisting the long-accepted rules regarding Jewish worship at Jerusalem's politically and religiously sensitive Temple Mount compound no longer apply. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office has repeatedly rejected his claims. It did so again today in declaring that the status quo still holds that a public Jewish prayer is forbidden on the Mount, which is administered by the Waqf Muslim Religious Authority. But here's what Ben-Gvir had to say this morning to Israel's Army radio.
אומר את זה בצורה הכי פשוטה. המדיניות בהר הבית מאפשרת להתפלל. ראש הממשלה, ואני לא ארחיב בנושא הזה, ידע שכשהצטרפתי לממשלה, אני אמרתי את זה בצורה הכי פשוטה. לא תהיה אפליה, לא תהיה גזענות בהר הבית. זה לא שאני עושה כל מה שאני רוצה בהר הבית. אם הייתי עושה כל מה שאני רוצה בהר הבית, מזמן דגל ישראל היה מונף שם.
אתה יכול היית מקים גם בית כנסת בהר הבית?
כן, כן, כן.
And joining us now is Yehuda Glick, a former member of the Knesset for the Likud Party, president of the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation, a longtime advocate of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. And I believe I did see you in that footage of the previous visit with Itamar Ben-Gvir on the Temple Mount. But let me just ask you, you've advocated for a change in the status quo. Do you agree with Minister Ben-Gvir? There is a change now, and it is okay for Jews to publicly pray on the Temple Mount.
Shalom, Kalev, and shalom to all those who are watching I-24. I've been active on Temple Mount, on what I call Zion. That's the Hebrew name of the place, Zion, the holy mountain of God, for over 40 years. And I don't remember a single day that there's been a status quo. Every single day had the current status quo for that day. When I started ascending mountain, we were allowed only one at a time, because they warned us that 2 Jews would go up at a time, it'll bring a third world war. Then it jumped to 5 at a time and 10 at a time. Then they said you're not allowed to move your lips. Suddenly you were allowed to move this. Jews have been praying publicly, openly on the Temple Mount, on Zion, for at least the last decade. Daily, publicly. The only change maybe we see in Ben Gvir is the fact that he's saying it out loud, and it was a secret that everybody knew about. And by the way, I want to tell you that the status quo has changed on the Islamic side also. They have taken over what's called the Golden Gate and turned it into a mosque. These are things that change. There's no such thing as a status quo. What happens is, and it's quite clear, and I heard Ben Gvir say it, the fact that there is a differentiation between Jews and non-Jews to pray on the mountain is something that is against any liberal Western value. And discrimination is something that we do not agree with. And therefore, the more people that come to the mountain, Jews or Christians, who want to pray, and who believe it's a holy place and should be a place, a house of prayer for all nations, this is the goal. And every single day, we will do whatever we can in order to bring about that goal. And anybody who claims that the very fact that a person prays is endangering or is bringing a World War III or is bringing a risk upon the region is a person who is actually saying, listen, the Muslims are such nice people. What can they do? They see a Jew praying. They see a Jew prostrating. They have no choice. They have to kill him. I don't go for that. In my eye, that is totally unacceptable. And I think that everybody should be allowed to pray. We should honor and respect anybody who prays on the mountain, whether he's Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or anybody else. That's what the mountain is for. And anybody who does not tolerate somebody else, these are the people that are causing friction on the mountain, and these are the ones that should not be there.
All right, Judith, please just stay with us. I just want to go in studio, and Ariel, the fact is the government says there's a status quo, and there has been a status quo in all the time I've been here, that the fact that some may be violating the status quo doesn't necessarily change that. And there are those in the security establishment who say the actions of Yehuda and Minister Ben Gvir are stoking unrest in the region that could and has led to violence.
Those statements, the most recent one was issued by no other than the head of Israel's internal security agency, the Shin Bet, who wrote a letter to all top decision makers in Israel last week, saying that the damage to the state of Israel is indescribable, not only in terms of Israel's foreign relations, but internally, because what we need to remember here is that the issue of the Temple Mount is the issue that is used most, not only in terms of quantity, but in terms of effectiveness for the Palestinian terror groups to incite terror. The October 7th attack they called Tufan al-Aqsa, the flood of al-Aqsa, because that is how they garner the radical elements in their society and call them to carry out violent attacks against Israel. Now, I visited the Temple Mount about a year ago to kind of see the situation, and what we have been seeing in recent weeks is taking the status quo a lot further. I did not see people bowing as they did last week, lying flat on the floor openly in some sort of protest, praying. And people who ascend the Temple Mount, the activists, and I spoke to, they take it more to the sovereignty issue, the nationalistic issue, whereas what we're hearing Yehuda raise the valid religious issue that you can have a discussion about, but changing the reality on the ground, that is not how you have that discussion that has dire security implications for the entire
Let's have Yehuda respond to that, Yehuda.
Let's translate the word in Hebrew or in English, status quo. Status quo means what the present situation is. The fact is that every single day in the past decade, there's been Jewish public prayer on the mountain, publicly, loud, and the police knew it.
But Yehuda, but there have been consequences, and for you personally,
there have not been consequences. The Palestinians who want to attack Israel, the Hamas who attacked Israel on the 7th of October did not do it because of the Temple Mount. They used the Temple Mount as an excuse, but they did it because they don't want Israel to be here. And I told you, when I started going up the mountain, they told us if 2 Jews will go at a time, it's going to be total danger. And the fact is that the more people that come,
Yehuda, why were you personally targeted? by a Palestinian terrorist.
I was personally targeted because there are people who, in this region who do not like the fact that there are Jews here. And they can use all kinds of
you don't think it was because of your activism? Wait, no. I'm just saying, you don't think it was your activism on the Temple Mount?
I know that I was attacked, and the use of Temple Mount is a good excuse, and it works, and it's popular as a propaganda. We have to understand and recognize the fact: Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the radical Islam does not want Israel to exist, and for them, there's no difference between Tel Aviv or Zion, the Holy Mountain. There's no difference for them. Right. And every single time we give in to terror, whether it's evacuating all the Jewish settlements in Gaza, the terror doesn't calm down. It gets more of an appetite. So if the Jews will stop going to the mountain, the terror will look for another appetite. Will look for other targets. They don't want us here, period. And we want to live here peacefully. And that's the only difference. We have to remember that very clearly and very carefully. The radical Islamic politicians don't want Israel to exist. They call it from the river to the sea, only Palestine.
No, of course.
Israel wants to live here peacefully with all its neighbors. And that's the difference.
All right. Yehuda Glick, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
I think...
Thank you so much. We really hope to hear better days and better times.
Indeed, of course.
And peace in the whole region.
Of
and
course.
Shalom in the world.
Yehuda, thank you very much. I can give you 30 seconds for a comment.
We're all for peace, of course, but the liberal argument presented here is ridiculous. There's a policy for the State of Israel. There's a policy concerning the Temple Mount. There is a status quo. Israel is committed to the status quo. The agreement between us and the Waqf and the Jordanian kingdom, we have to abide by this. Ben-Gvir, a few minutes ago, talked about building a synagogue in Temple Mount. So it's what we are talking about. Let's be real, let's be serious and pragmatical.
All right. Well, I'm sure this will continue to be debated, but Doron Avital, Ariel Osran, stay with us. More coming up on The Rundown.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Let's take a break from some of the war news we'll be reporting, and I would say this on a more positive story. It's been a couple of weeks now since the Paris Olympics concluded, but Israel is still basking in the glow of the record-setting win of 7 overall medals at the game, which some even see as I would say, as a high watermark of this nation's athletic achievements. Even more impressive is that Israeli athletes did so well, despite performing under the pressure of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests and even death threats directed their way. Now, one of those was Tom Ruveni, who won the gold medal in windsurfing despite never having previously titled in a major international competition. Ruveni credited his win to other outstanding young Israelis, the soldiers who are defending this country, and he joins us in studio today.
Nice.
Tom, and you bring your medal with us, which you have to show.
It's pretty nice, especially when it's gold. It's something you always dream about, and finally I have one.
You have one.
Yeah.
Before we get to your story in a minute, I just want to ask you, what about the feeling that people have? There was an expression after Israel, of course, won its first major championship in basketball. We are on the map. Israel is on the map. There is a feeling, a sense, that this Olympics, in some sense, put Israel on the international sporting map. I mean, how do you feel? How do you and the other athletes that competed there feel overall about it?
I think it's pretty amazing to be part of this. 7 medals is an amazing achievement. We're such a small country and we've been through so much. And the sports is just improving and improving from Olympics to Olympics. And in 3 Olympics, there might be already 20 medals. Like, that's the graph we're going for. So it's amazing to be part of it, and I'm happy to contribute to that achievement.
Right. Now, Israel has, windsurfing is one of those things Israel, like judo, have had achievements in. But you, I would still say your gold medal came as something as a surprise to some people. What about yourself? I mean, going into it, did you think you would win a gold despite the fact, I'm correct, right? You had never won on coming first in a major international championship, including in Europe.
Yeah, so I haven't had a medal in European or World Championships leading up. I was close quite a lot of times, but I always somehow in the end managed to lose the medal. So I wasn't a high hope for a medal or even a gold medal like at all. I just knew I had to do my thing. I knew I was capable of medaling. I had the capabilities of medaling. I've proven it in the past. I just haven't gotten past that step. And once I got to the final race and I got the medal for sure, I knew that the pressure went off. I just went there to have fun, and I made gold. So that was quite an amazing experience.
You certainly made gold. And like I said, you did it. And many of the other athletes were competing in somewhat difficult circumstances. We saw the protests in the streets of Paris. We heard reports of some of the athletes even getting SMS messages, or I don't know if they were WhatsApp or some kind of messages on their phones that with death threats. How much did that enter into the consciousness? And of course, you were under very heavy security, the Israeli athletes.
Yeah, so in terms of security, I'm very happy that everything went well and the security did a very good job in protecting us. We had a lot of security, and we were not in Marseille where we were competing. The sailing delegation were not allowed to leave the Olympic Village, so we're used to it, but it's not normal, and we're very happy to have security. And yeah, I did receive messages. I received some scammers trying to send me messages on WhatsApp and trying to make me open links. And I received threats on Instagram and death threats and very nasty messages. But I really took it in a positive way.
In a positive way? How was that?
Yeah, well, I see these people really hurting about the fact that I'm in the Olympics, and I said to myself that if I do well, it'll hurt them even more. So that was my motivation. And that's what I really tried to do. And I would read the messages. My girlfriend saw some of the messages and asked me if I wanted them deleted. And I was like, no, I want to read them. they're giving me motivation, and I'm going to like twist the knife in their hearts even more, and that's what I did, and I think it caused a lot of pain to them, and I'm really happy.
Well, I think you did. That was your triumph. What about in terms of dealing with the other athletes? We did have some unfortunate incidents where, for example, we saw some competitors from the Arab world, countries that are not friendly to Israel. In one case, even clearly throwing a match or coming up with an excuse not to do it. So what was the interaction with other athletes there, knowing that you were from Israel?
So in the Olympic Village in Marseille, in the sailing world, there isn't too much Arab competitors. They're not considered that good in these sports.
But even from other countries.
No, so from other countries is really nice, and I think everyone went with the Olympic spirit of not involving politics inside, and the athletes were all really nice, and if they did ask questions, they asked it to try and get information and not come with their certain agenda. I have a lot of friends in the sailing world, and they're all really open to hear my side, and I try to give it as good a, show the state of Israel as amazing that it actually is, and show actually who we are. But we didn't receive any hostile messages, like confrontations or anything like that in Marseille.
Right. Now, as I said, when you came back, you gave special credit to the other young people who are guarding Israel, be it in Gaza, on the northern border, in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Talk about that. What you're singling them out and making sure to include them in your.
Yeah, of course. I wouldn't be able to go to the Olympics if they wouldn't have sacrificed their lives to go and not sacrifice, but put their life at risk to go and save our country. And if without them, we wouldn't be here right now at all. So I think you have to say thank you. They've done so much for this country, and they deserve their place. And I really want to say thank you to all of them from the bottom of my heart. And I think this medal, they're part of it. And as a country, we're all united, and we want to finish this war as soon as possible. But I have to say thank you to all of them. And my brother as well was fighting for quite a while, which is not easy in the preparations for the Olympics. Thankfully, at the Olympics, he was with us in Marseille, but until then, he was in Gaza or in other places around Israel. And I'm really, it was really hard to have him there whilst I was competing or training, and I know what other families are going through, so I really try to show everyone that they're all part of this, and without them, we wouldn't even be here.
Right. Now, anybody who goes to the beaches in Israel or here or in South can see the windsurfers out there and maybe understand how Israel has achieved. The judo has been exceptional, and that may have something to do with the circumstances of the country. But the athletic community has said for years that Israel does not invest in the kind of athletic infrastructure, starting from the youngest ages, from the schools. I come from the United States. Yeah. You could see how much is invested. You think this Olympics is going to maybe give some motivation for that, even though the country obviously has a lot of other needs and concerns it has to deal with?
Yeah, so I think in the sailing and windsurfing world, the clubs are really spread out over Israel, and they're doing great work to raise new athletes, and new athletes are coming all the time, really high quality ones. In other sports, it's hard for me to say because I haven't come from that world. I think there is room for improvement, but I think that's where the Olympic Committee in Israel as a nation is going. And you've always got to factor in that most of our budget goes to war and defense, and that's a big part of the country, and you have to deal with what you have. And I think we're going in the right direction in sports, and you can see by the number of medals going up and up. And of course, if we invest more, you get more back, but there is always a limit to how much you can invest.
All right. What's next for you? Is there another competition, international competitions that you're going to be going out on?
Yeah, so right now I'm already thinking about LA 28. That's my goal, to be there and try and get another one of these. No one promises me anything, and I have to work really hard to just be there and prove that I deserve to be there. I really want to be there. In July 2025 is the World Championships, and that's part of the preparation for the Olympics, and I really want to get another medal, my first medal in the World Championships. I haven't got one yet, so that would be a nice medal to have in the closet. So we're working on that.
All right, gentlemen, I think we can agree during a difficult time for Israel.
The fact that you could deliver at the moment of truth so successfully, even though he wasn't even thinking it comes out, this is an inspiration also to military people. To deliver in the moment of truth is the most important thing there is, and this is what we see in athletics. We are very inspired.
It was an inspiration, I think, in a challenging time. Tom Raveni, thank you for joining us, and we wish you all success going forward.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as we just talked about, there were threats to carry out terror attacks on Israeli or Jewish targets during the Olympics that, thank God, didn't come about. But such an attack did materialize this weekend in France on a synagogue in the south of the country. That's raising renewed concerns that the surge of anti-Semitism there since October 7th will find expression in violence against French Jews and Jewish sites. Emily Francis has more on that in this report.
Jews in France have had enough as anti-Semitism only continues to be on the rise, especially in the wake of October 7th. With a population around 500,000, France is home to the third largest Jewish community in the world. And hundreds attended this Paris rally against anti-Semitism and terror.
I'm angry. We have to be angry. I'm Jewish, and Jews must stop doing what we always do, submitting. To say sorry, no. We're angry. It's not normal to attack someone because they're Jewish. It's not normal to attack someone because they're Muslim. It's not normal to attack someone because they're black. Because they're like this or like that. We must learn to live together.
Yesterday, police arrested the man suspected of an attempted terror attack during a crowded Shabbat service in the seaside town of La Grande Motte in southern France. Draped in a Palestinian flag and a Palestinian kafia, as well as carrying bottles of yellow liquid, he's accused of setting fires at the doors of the Bet Yaakov synagogue and also setting fire to police cars with gas canisters, triggering an explosion and injuring a police officer.
I want to say here that we have avoided an absolute tragedy. But what happened here shocks and scandalizes all Republicans in our country. Because the reality is that, once again, French Jews have been targeted, attacked because of their beliefs. We are outraged, revolted, and scandalized by this, given the terrible increase in anti-Semitic acts, even more so since October 7th.
Deliberately setting fire to a synagogue where the rabbi and his family live while waiting with an axe. This is an anti-Semitic act, and it must be denounced as such, otherwise we create suspicion and a confusion of genres. And I think that the French people, and particularly Jews, expect us to put things into words. Anti-Semitic acts are on the rise. Hatred of Jews and hatred of Israel affects French children, women, and men who have the right to live their religion as they wish.
French President Emmanuel Macron added that this was an act of terror and that the fight against anti-Semitism is a daily fight. And now officials say police presence outside of Jewish sites in France will increase as a result.
And joining us now for more from Paris is Simone Rodin-Benzaken, Managing Director of the American Jewish Committee Europe, the office in Europe. Simone, thank you for joining us. First of all, I want to ask you, we just spoke with one of the Israeli athletes from the Olympics about how there was concerns that there might be attacks during the Olympics. And of course, there was such heavy security there during the time of the Olympics. And I wonder if now that if there's perhaps a drop-off in that security, that sort of provides an opening for those who were thinking at carrying out such attacks during that period.
Well, first of all, it's difficult to say because, of course, Paris, we had the Olympics, but we also now have the Paralympics, which means that we still have a lot of security, a lot of police, a lot of army still across the city. But it's not just Paris, as we just saw. This what just happened in the rest of France, in the southern city of La Grande Motte, a tiny Jewish community. And so the real question is not only right now during the Olympics, but the wider question as to the ability of the state to protect Jews the 365 days a year in such a particular context where anti-Semitism has really exploded since October 7th. The numbers speak for themselves. We had a 1,000% increase in 2023. We are going towards the same trend in 2024. And so the real question, of course, is not just at that particular moment, but really how can the state make sure to protect Jews 365 days a year?
Right, and that may be almost an impossible mission. Maybe help us draw a line from some of the rhetoric that we hear from some of these demonstrations and protests on the streets of Paris or elsewhere. So pro-Palestinian, but really more anti-Israel, maybe anti-Semitic, and the tolerance of such expressions and how then they work themselves out. We saw that attacker in that CCTV footage with that Palestinian flag around his waist. So clearly that was a factor, a motivation here.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is a question that not only concerns France, but really the entire world. As we all know, Hamas on October 7th and then every day since then has sworn to globalize the Intifada. We have seen also signs over the last days of bring the war back home in the United States. And that is really the objective. It's very clear that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are clearly linked. We have known this for years, and it's now the clearest, obvious expression with that attack that just took place. And that means that I think we have to question also the responsibility of some of the public actors, in particular in the French space, where we have seen the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon and his party, the Unbowed Party, express themselves, use what they call the Palestinian cause as a matter of trying to get electoral votes, of really inciting people to hatred. And this is the exact consequence and the result of these words that have been used over the past few weeks and months, really.
Right, and you talk some of the actors in the public space and some of the politicians on the far left, but the reality is these are actors who may be holding positions of authority in France, depending on how the negotiations to a new government work out. How concerned are you that the authorities will go not only not being able to tamp down this rhetoric or protect Jews, but even, in a sense, throw more gasoline on the fire there in France?
Yes, I think that is one of the very sad stories over the past few months since Emmanuel Macron called for the elections or dissolved the parliament. The problem is indeed that the far left is there, and more importantly, that the left, the traditional governing parties of the left, the Socialist Party, have decided to team up with the far left and not considered anti-Semitism to be a red line, which for every what we call Republican Democratic Party should be a red line, and it hasn't been. So it's extremely concerning. I hope, and most Jews hope, that they will not gain power, but it's obviously a concern. We, as AJC, did a survey a couple of months ago in where we asked French Jews which party they considered to be the responsible for anti-Semitism, and 92% said they considered the far left, the Unbowed Party, to be number one party responsible for anti-Semitism, and 56% said if that Jean-Luc Mélenchon was to be prime minister or president, they would leave the country. So there's obviously concern, and we hope that will be a wake-up call for the rest of the nation, and in particular for the rest of the governing Socialist Party, to stop this unholy alliance.
All right. Just very briefly, how concerned are you about for the future of the Jews of France?
I am very concerned. I'm very concerned for the future of the Jews everywhere in the world. I think that is exactly what we all realized on October 7th, that Jews that anti-Semitism is back, and it's back with revenge. It's big, it's important, and this is also why we need Israel to be strong and safe, because once Israel is strong and safe, Jews all over the world will be as well.
All right, Simone Rodin Benzaken of the American Jewish Committee in Europe, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. And disturbing trends abroad, and as you heard Simone says, a strong Israel.
I think a strong Israel is something that the Jews all over the world can rely on in terms of even their self-esteem and their self-image. It's not only by coming and making Aliyah to Israel. It's important that Israel would be a beacon of strength and pride also for Jews around the world. And I think when Israel would recover from this crisis and this war, I hope things would settle down also for Jews abroad.
Getting back to the crisis, there is some news out of regarding the hostage situation that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, so the White House trying to keep the dim light still on, keeping it alive with John Kirby, National Security spokesperson for the White House, saying that work-level groups remain on the ground in negotiations in Cairo as we speak, saying that they are they're expected to continue to work to bridge the gaps in the coming days. As for the Hezbollah attack, thwarted attack, failed attack, call it whatever you want, Kirby said that didn't affect the negotiations, the talks at all, and that the negotiations are still ongoing with Brett McGurk, the special envoy for the Middle East.
I mean, there are others who say that the fact that the attack happened and the way it unfolded may help the negotiations.
I would think so. First of all, I think we have to be as we have to be at sync in the war plans with the U.S. in terms of the way even they might have helped us in the context of the preemptive strike in terms of intelligence. It's not clear, but there were hints to this. We have to be at sync with the U.S. in terms of the negotiation. If the U.S. thinks, and together with our negotiation team, that there's a deal that makes sense to us, I think we should follow it. And then, of course, if there's a partner on the other side, nobody can tell. But let's work at sync, diplomatically wise, and at war plans with the U.S. I think this is the conclusion of today.
Right. I would also, there were those who say that how the attack turned out would maybe give some political maneuverability for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Surely.
In fact, having a win, let's say, there in the north, so to speak.
Yeah. So I would say delegate as much authority to the negotiation team, and it's our own interest, we have to understand, to get our hostages back. It's hard to underestimate the importance of this issue for us, and if we can come out with a deal with a reasonable price, we should do it.
All right, Doron Avital, Ariel Osseron, thank you for joining us this evening on The Rundown. We are going to continue, though, with the program. Israel was able to turn away that big Hezbollah attack yesterday, as we've been talking about. But the country of Ukraine was not so lucky when it came to a major Russian air assault on several of its cities, including Kyiv and Kharkiv. At least 6 people were killed, dozens were wounded, and electricity and water infrastructures suffered serious damage. Now, our correspondent Zach Anders, who usually reports for us on airstrikes in northern Israel, is in Ukraine this week on assignment, and he filed this report from the Kharkiv area.
From Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine tonight, off the backs of another massive Russian attack, one of the largest since the start of the full-scale war almost 3 years ago now. What we know at this point in the afternoon, as many as 6 dead across the country in an attack that Russia claims was targeting energy infrastructure. We have images coming across in Kyiv showing a hit near the dam. The dam is still intact, however, a major catastrophe averted with the thousands of people that are downstream from that hydroelectric plant if it was to fail. Of course, we know that Russia has targeted dams before last summer as well. This was a massive attack of over 100 missiles, over 100 drones that were used, the same type that are supplied to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, these Shahed drones. Russia has been buying from Iran and even now producing themselves inside their country. So another very critical moment, Kyiv reiterating their calls to be able to use Western weapons to strike targets inside Russia, that Kyiv says would help hold off the worst of these attacks and be able to strike the aircraft and the different sites where these attacks are being launched from inside Russia.
Zach Anders in Ukraine there. Now, not everything in this region, of course, is war and strife and conflict. Let's take a look at the story of one Egyptian man who was just aiming to be more self-sufficient, so he decided to take his hobby and turn it into a business. And that hobby is raising rare and expensive breeds of chickens on his rooftop farm in the heart of the city. Jody Notelevitz has the story.
It started out as just a hobby, a way to be more self-sufficient and provide for his household. But soon, this Egyptian man decided to take his chicken breeding operation to the next level. Bassem Badr has turned the roof of his house into a breeding ground, raising rare and expensive strains of chickens, as well as all sorts of other bird breeds, including ducks and geese. He says his hobby developed because he found beauty in the birds.
The rare birds give the place splendor and joyful vibes. This is a hobby like any other hobby, just like the hobby of collecting expensive paintings. Why? You can never ask why. It is a hobby, passion, and love.
He achieved self-sufficiency in egg and poultry production for his household and gives out some to his relatives, only trading in the rare breeds and selling them to hobbyists or other farmers.
I've been into birds since I was 6 or 7 until today. Every time I say I'm going to quit and sell the birds, then after less than a week, I go and buy again.
The birds can range in price anywhere between 500 to 30,000 Egyptian pounds, depending on their size and color. The most popular of these, the Brahma chickens, are in demand for their unique features and substantial size. They comprise most of Bassem's breeds on his rooftop farm.
Some people collect stamps, some people collect coins, and some collect chickens. Some of those chickens look pretty unusual, I have to say. That ends our program for this evening. Of course, you can continue to follow us on our website or the various social media platforms of I-24 News. We'll be back tomorrow for a whole new program. When I have the time, of course, I like to say at the end of the program, let's see the hostages back safe and sound as soon as possible in whatever way possible. See you tomorrow. If you get the chance, catch the rundown.